I watched a bulldozer chew through my family's stone bridge like it was made of cardboard, and the woman in the white Tesla just smiled at me through her window. She didn't flinch when the last arch cracked. She just lifted her coffee and said, "This is what happens when you don't cooperate with the homeowners association." 48 hours later, her shiny Lakeside resort was shut down with red tape and a foreclosure notice, and she was the one standing there shaking. My name's Jack Miller, and I'm not the kind of guy who looks for trouble. I build cabinets for a living, I keep my grass trimmed, I wave at my neighbors, I pay my bills on time. I live on Cedar Lake in a quiet neighborhood called Maple Ridge, the kind of place where people argue over sprinklers and mailbox paint like it's a federal issue. We've got an HOA. Like most places, they collect dues, send emails about trash bins, and pretend they're saving civilization one approved shade of beige at a time. I never had a problem with it until Tiffany Hartwell moved in. Tiffany showed up like she was moving onto a movie set. White blazer, perfect hair, sunglasses that never came off, and a Tesla so clean it looked like it was allergic to dust. Within a few months, she wasn't just a resident, she was the president of the Maple Ridge Homeowners Association. Somehow, every board meeting ended with her smiling and everybody else nodding like she'd hypnotized them. The first time she came to my house, she didn't even pretend she was there to be friendly. She stood at the edge of my driveway, looked past me at the lake and said, "You ever think about selling this little slice of paradise?" I told her no. She blinked like she wasn't used to hearing that word, then tried again softer. "I could make it worth your while." I said, "It's not for sale. Have a good night." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. We'll see. The next morning, I got my first violation notice from the HOA, not a warning, a violation. My grass was half an inch above regulation. My mailbox was non-compliant black. My shed had a visual inconsistency. I'm not kidding, those were the words. I fixed what I could because I had work and a kid and a life, and I didn't feel like playing games. But every time I crossed one thing off, 2 more notices showed up like weeds. A week later, I came home to a clipboard guy in a neon vest standing in my yard with a measuring tape. He didn't ask. He didn't knock. He just walked around like he owned the place. I stepped outside and said, "Can I help you?" He glanced up like I was interrupting his sacred duty. HOA inspection. On my property. He shrugged. "It's in the bylaws." That's how it started. Not with one big explosion, but with 1,000 little cuts. Fees stacked up. Letters kept coming. And Tiffany always signed them with this neat little flourish like she was proud of it. Then she went after something she knew I actually cared about. My daughter Emma is 16, and she's tough, but she's still a kid. One day she comes home from school, quieter than usual, drops her backpack and says, "Dad, why are people saying you're like fighting the neighborhood?" That hit me harder than any fine. Because suddenly it wasn't just paperwork, it was my kid getting pulled into Tiffany's nonsense. I went to the next board meeting, sat in that bland clubhouse room under fluorescent lights, and waited my turn like a normal person. Tiffany was at the front tapping a pen, smiling like a news anchor. When I finally spoke, I kept it calm. "I'd like to know why I'm being singled out." She didn't miss a beat. "Jack, no one is singling you out. We're simply enforcing the community standards." I said, "Community standards, or your standards." That's the first time her expression slipped. She leaned forward, voice sweet enough to rot your teeth. "If you're unhappy living under rules, maybe Maple Ridge isn't the place for you." A few people in the room stared at the table. Nobody backed me up, not out loud. After the meeting, as people shuffled out, Tiffany caught me by the door like she'd been waiting. She lowered her voice and said, "Sell me the lake frontage and all of this goes away." I just looked at her. She nodded toward my house like she was pointing out a stain. "Otherwise, I'm going to make your life very expensive." I drove home with my hands tight on the wheel thinking, okay, fine, I'll do this the right way. So I hired a lawyer. Not some TV guy with a billboard, just a local attorney who knew property disputes and HOA nonsense. We started drafting a formal response. And that's when Tiffany stopped playing petty. A week later, I got a new notice, not about grass or paint, but about my stone bridge. That bridge sits at the edge of my property, arching over a narrow inlet. It's old, built by my great-grandfather back when men solved problems with rocks and stubbornness. It's not fancy, but it's solid, and it's been there longer than most of the houses in Maple Ridge. The notice said the bridge was an unpermitted structure and a safety hazard, and the HOA was ordering it removed within 30 days. I called the number furious. Tiffany answered like she'd been waiting. I said, "You can't touch that bridge." She said, "Actually, Jack, we can. The board voted. The board voted to demolish something on my private property." She sighed like I was being difficult. "It's for the community's safety." I told her I'm contesting this. Her voice went colder. "You can contest all you want. Just remember, contests have consequences." That Sunday, Emma had a soccer game. I left early, stood on the sideline with other parents, tried to focus on my kid and not on the knot in my stomach. Halfway through the first half, my phone rang. It was my neighbor. His voice sounded wrong. "Jack, you need to get home, right now." I said, "What's going on?" He swallowed. "They're out there with equipment. They're breaking your bridge." I didn't even tell Emma. I just ran to my truck and drove like my brain was on fire. When I turned onto my street, I saw a bulldozer parked by the inlet, an excavator arm swinging chunks of stone sliding into the water. Dust hung in the air like smoke. And Tiffany Hartwell was standing there in a spotless blazer holding a phone up like she was filming a sunset. I jumped out of my truck and yelled, "Stop! What the hell are you doing?" She didn't look startled. She didn't look guilty. She just turned her head slowly and said, "Emergency abatement. Emergency." I pointed at the bridge. "That thing has been here almost a century." She lifted a laminated paper toward me without stepping closer. "Permit? Signed. Approved. Immediate action." I grabbed for it, and she pulled it back, still smiling. "Don't touch me, Jack." I shouted for the crew to stop, but they kept going, eyes down, like they were just doing a job. I called the sheriff. I called the county office. I called anyone I could think of. A deputy showed up, looked at Tiffany's paperwork, then looked at me like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Sir, if the HOA has authorization, this is a civil matter." I stared at him. "You're watching them destroy my property." He shrugged. "Take it up with your lawyer." And that was the moment, standing there while stone collapsed into the lake, I felt the bottom drop out of me. Not dramatic, not poetic, just this blunt, ugly thought, maybe she really can do whatever she wants. That night I sat at my kitchen table staring at the fine notices, the legal letters, the photos Emma took on her phone of the bridge half gone. I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. At one point I actually whispered out loud to nobody, "Did I mess up by pushing back?" And then I looked down the hall at my daughter's room, the light under her door, and I remembered why just giving in wasn't an option. If I folded, Tiffany didn't just get my land, she got the lesson. The next day, Dolores Price knocked on my door. Dolores is 78, sharp as a tack, and she's lived on this lake longer than anyone. She used to work in county administration, the kind of person who reads forms for fun and notices what other people miss. She didn't walk in with sympathy. She walked in with a folder. She sat down, flipped it open, and said, "That woman made a mistake." I said, "Unless your folder rebuilds bridges, I'm not sure." Dolores cut me off. "Look at this." She pointed to Tiffany's emergency permit. The description didn't match my bridge at all. It listed the structure as a commercial dock obstruction. I blinked. "Commercial, I don't run a business." Dolores nodded. "Exactly." And here, she pulled out another packet. Environmental paperwork tied to Tiffany's big project down the shore, a lakeside resort she'd been bragging about for months. In the newer report, my bridge was mysteriously missing from the site map, like it never existed. But in an older planning document, the bridge was clearly drawn and labeled. Dolores tapped the dates. Someone didn't just forget, someone removed it. My stomach tightened. Why would she do that? Dolores gave me this flat, tired look. Because if the bridge existed on paper, it could complicate permits. And Tiffany Hartwell doesn't like complications. She likes obstacles that can be bulldozed. I called Rachel Kim that afternoon, a lawyer recommended by a contractor friend, someone who handled environmental compliance and property issues. She listened, asked for copies, and when she finally spoke, her voice was calm in a way that scared me. "Jack," she said, "if she altered environmental filings, that's not just an HOA power trip. That's serious." I said, "How serious?" Rachel paused. "Serious enough that inspectors don't ignore it. Serious enough that projects get shut down." The next morning we didn't scream, we didn't threaten, we filed. We submitted the photos, the conflicting maps, the permit description that called my private bridge a commercial dock, the timestamps, the paper trail. I didn't feel like a hero doing it. I felt like a guy throwing a rock at a tank and hoping it hit something important. 2 days later I got my answer. I drove past Tiffany's resort side and saw county vehicles parked out front, inspectors in hard hats, clipboards, cameras. Tiffany was there, of course, marching up to them like she owned the shoreline. Even from the road I could see her hands moving, her face tight, her body language screaming control. I parked and walked closer, staying back, just watching. One inspector held up a document and spoke calmly. Tiffany snapped loud enough that people turned their heads. "You can't do this," she said. "Do you know who I am?" The inspector didn't blink. He pointed at the paper and said something I couldn't hear, but I saw the moment Tiffany understood. She lunged forward, trying to talk over him. "This is harassment. This is sabotage. That man," she jabbed a finger in my direction, "that man is a problem." The inspector glanced at me, then back at her, and said, "Clear as day, ma'am, we're issuing a stop work order." For the first time since all this began, Tiffany looked genuinely rattled. She tried to recover fast. "Fine, I'll call the board. I'll call my attorney. We'll handle this." The inspector turned away like he'd heard it 100 times. Tape went up. Signs went on the gate. And Tiffany, the same woman who'd smirked while my bridge was destroyed, stood there staring at red tape like it was an insult. Then it got worse for her. That afternoon, 2 cars pulled up with a bank logo on the doors. A man stepped out with a folder and walked straight to the front office like he'd done it before. I didn't hear every word, but I saw the body language. Tiffany's shoulders stiffened, her hands started shaking. She grabbed the folder, flipped pages too fast, like speed could change what was written. The bank guy pointed to a section, then to the gate with the stop work order. Tiffany's voice went high and sharp. "This is temporary. It'll be resolved." He didn't argue. He just handed her another paper. Foreclosure notice. I watched Tiffany Hartwell's world crack the same way my bridge had, not with a bulldozer, but with ink and signatures and consequences she couldn't intimidate. She spun toward the inspectors, then toward the bank rep, then toward her own workers, like she was looking for someone to blame, someone to bully into fixing it. But this time nobody flinched, nobody nodded, nobody played along. She caught my eye across the parking lot, and her face twisted not into anger, into panic. And I didn't say a word. Because the loudest sound in that moment wasn't her yelling, it was the silence of a system that finally stopped listening to her. That's where it ended for me, right there watching Tiffany stare at the paper that took her power away. Lesson? If someone's weapon is rules, your shield is receipts.